Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American living and reporting from Kyiv. In today's podcast, week 68 of war in Ukraine, and this is the third week of June 2023. In today's podcast, counteroffensive began, but the Ukraine armed forces moving slowly. Ukraine so far liberated 100 square kilometers of its land in the last couple of weeks. So we had to wait for a long time for this big counteroffensive. Days after the news that the Ukraine army had recaptured territory from Russian occupation forces, Kyiv's counteroffensive is still full of intrigue. The reason Ukraine trumpeted this large-scale operation for so long, but never actually did that, is that at the tactical level, it's important to keep the details of the hostilities obscure so the element of surprise can be benefited. Ukraine waited that long because the Ukraine armed forces could receive the military equipment on time promised, but the Western couldn't receive the military equipment on time promised by the Western allies. Sanctions, as well as the sheer scale of the occupation, which now covers 20% of Ukraine, could further undermine Russia's military effort. So there are a few reasons why we waited for the counteroffensive for so long. First of all, these are economic reasons. The beginning of counteroffensive was cautious and gradual, but he followed a careful, thought-out schedule and geography. The timing depended on the number of internal and external considerations. It was important for the Ukrainian military command to preserve and multiply the momentum gained during the capture of Kherson region and the long blockade of Russian troops in the Battle of Bakhmut. At the end of the winter, the Ukrainian armed forces took the initiative. There are several advantages. The state of the terrain, not frozen and without mud, means that troops are more mobile, they can act more suddenly and break through. Also, Ukraine received new military equipment, and the tactical roles have been reversed. The Ukrainians are now on the offensive, and the Russians are on the defensive. In other words, the schedule of the operation will no longer be dictated by the Kremlin, but by the Kiev's tactical calculations. The areas of the country chosen for the counteroffensive also make sense, apart from the element of surprise necessary for the success of such operation. Apparently, Ukrainian forces are attacking in the south, in the direction of Crimea, and in the Donbas region and around Bakhmut. Blowing up the Kakhovka plant helped build a Russian bastion across the Dnipro, but it would be a mistake to overestimate its influence. In any case, the Ukrainian armed forces would have to force the Dnipro line in difficult conditions. The Ukrainian army is now focused on preventing a possible Russian advance toward Odessa in the southwest, making its presence felt in the south and taking back the illegally annexed Donbas region. So, besides economic reasons, there is a strategic reason. In order to understand when and where the summer counteroffensive will take place, we have pushed the structural reasons for these operations to the background. After all, starting a reconquest with arms in hand was not an easy task. Since the beginning of the invasion, Ukraine suffered significant human, territorial, financial, and industrial losses. If the Ukrainians decide to act now, it's because they believe that the Russian Federation is not on the verge of economic collapse, political revolution, or military demobilization. The expectation of the saving effect of sanctions, hypothetical regime change, desertion, of exhaustion of the Russian defense ecosystem is illusory in Kyiv's eyes. On the other hand, The counteroffensive depends on a certain angle of relations with the United States, NATO, and the European Union. Kiev believes that the country received more support by demonstrating its determination to restore the borders of its country. And that's right, the West directed the bulk of its financial and military aid after Ukraine managed to save the capital from occupation. As Ukraine raided its counteroffensive by gathering Western weapons and sending its troops for NATO training, Russia spent at least 7 months preparing for its potential definitive stage of the war by raiding reserves, artillery and aviation support, stockpiling ammunition and fuel, and procuring more drones. So Russian forces also burrowed into the territory they occupied in southern Ukraine, digging lines of trenches and erecting fortifications along the entire 900-mile-long front line from the Zaporizhia region to the Russia's Belgorod region. The massive network of defenses has weaknesses, according to military experts who described Russia's preparations, but it's already showing offensive operation and creating bottlenecks for the Ukrainian army, forcing it to try to break through on narrow paths, which allows Russia to regroup and aim more precisely. Moreover, the Russians had months to create a defensive plan. They've dug in and used the terrain. They've been sitting there for 6 months, laying traps and mines. More than a week after the start of Ukraine's much-hyped counteroffensive, which Kiev and its Western supporters say will push the Russian invaders back to pre-invasion lines, there are signs that Ukraine is unfortunately unlikely to achieve lightning gains as it did last fall in the northeast of Kharkiv region and southern Kherson regions. So far, Ukraine has claimed advances covering little more than 100 square kilometers or 60 square miles of territory. However, Russia occupies roughly took over 33,000 square miles of the territory since the beginning of the war. About half of the territory was seized before the February 2022 invasion, including Crimea and part of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Some analysis and even some members of the Ukrainian military believe that Kiev has yet to unleash its full counteroffensive and is holding back most of its attack brigades. Even if that's true, other experts say Russian military failures last year created a misperception of weaknesses. Offensive operations are far more difficult, and attacking armies suffer far more casualties than the defensive side. Last year's roles are reversed, with Ukraine trying to attack. The Russians are fighting on well-prepared positions and have accumulated a sufficient amount of artillery ammunition. Plus, they have more drones, and in this aspect, at the moment, they are no worse than the armed forces of Ukraine. Analysts say that Russia has built so many fortifications that it doesn't even have enough troops to deploy along all its defensive lines. Mazes of trenches and obstacles, including cement anti-tank pyramids called Dragon's Teeth, are concentrated in the Zaporizhia region, which is a key axis for Ukraine counterattack. A sea of landmines is also scattered across southern Ukraine. Ukrainians are still trying to break through the forward Russian minefields in the most of the southern Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. Unfortunately, the Russian forces had enough time to mine the front lines with millions of mines. That's the biggest problem for Ukraine armed forces of the last few weeks. The Russians are sowing the new minefields as fast as they can, which, from their point of view, is crucial because at the same time, and regardless of how well entrenched their troops are suffering severe losses to the Ukrainian artillery and long-range fire. Thus, they need more minefields to prevent Ukrainians from reaching their positions. There are many minefields in the front of positions and many kilometers away from them on the roads, in the fields, and it's really difficult for Ukrainians to break through. And a lot of Ukrainians' breaching equipment has been deployed already, so cutting through all these mines is a real challenge. That's the first line of defense. Aviation support is a weak spot for Ukrainians, with Ukraine President Zelensky pleading from the outset for F-16 jets. President Biden decided last month to allow allies to supply the planes, but it will take months to train Ukrainian crews to operate them. Though Russia has quantitative superiority in air power and artillery, with Ukraine actively trying to degrade the latter. Moscow lacks manpower, arms, commanders, and unsustainable efficient command structure. Pavel Luzhin, a military expert of Jamestown Foundation, said in a recent analysis. So far, as of June 18th, Ukrainian forces have reported retaking several villages in the Donetsk region that includes Blagodatne, Makarivka, Neskuchne, Storozhov in Donetsk province, as well as Lobkovo, Levanda, Novodrivka in Luhansk region. Fighting is also taking place in the southern portion of the front in Zaporizhia, in the region of the same name. The Ukrainian forces are just probing Russian defense right now. They are making gains, but not decisive ones, said Nicola Fasol, a recent fellow at the University of Bologna, whose research focused on Russian military strategies. The breakthroughs that Ukrainian forces have achieved are localized. To succeed, Ukraine will have to penetrate heavily fortified Russian defense lines and quickly redistribute their forces. Once they identify a possible breakthrough point, one of the key factors for success will be the ability to redeploy and concentrate their forces, which are now spread across the entire line of attack. It's going to come down to efficiency and numbers. In most battles, the defining army has a strategic advantage. So going on to be defensive, and it's going to be costly for the Ukrainians. Since Ukraine's last counteroffensive operation last fall, which saw the successful capture of 7,500 square miles in Kharkiv region, Russia has had time to prepare and also introduce another round of conscription, though Moscow has said it will not be sending any new conscripts to Ukraine. Several war experts think that one potential strategy Ukraine might be thinking about is trying to break the land bridge that connects mainland Russia to Crimea. This would be particularly advantageous to Ukraine because it would make it more difficult for Moscow to coordinate attack with troops in Crimea. But the plan has been complicated because the destruction of Kakhovka Dam last week has limited Ukrainian forces' ability to push forward in the south. 2 weeks since the counteroffensive began, Ukraine is making modest but steady progress in 3 areas of attack across 1,000 kilometers or 620-mile front line. Troops are launching probing attacks, while most of Ukraine's forces are being held in reserve, waiting for a big enough opening in Russian defenses to launch a main attack and try to recapture land in the south of the country. The fighting has been hard, with heavy casualties on both sides, and opposing armies claiming the upper hand. Ukraine's advance in southern Donetsk has started but continues. Currently, the Ukrainian troops are attacking at 3 points: Bakhmut, where they advance in north and south of the city, which remains firmly under Russian control, also south of Zaporizhia, and in the southern region of Donetsk, where a number of villages have been taken back. According to the spokesman, fighting in the Berdyansk direction continues in the area of the villages Makarivka, west of the Donetsk region, and as near as the villages Novodanilivka and Novorokhovka in the Zaporizhia region. In the direction of Bakhmut, units of the armed forces of Ukraine conducted assault operations in the direction Rozdalivka, Krasnopilska, which is several kilometers north of Bakhmut and Solidar. The settlements listed by Kovalyov show that the fighting is taking place in approximately the same areas as yesterday and the day before yesterday. In the Tabriya direction, the defense forces continue to move forward. Over the last day, Russian losses in killed and wounded amounted to more than 4 companies, or around 8,900 soldiers in total. This was announced by Alexander Turnovsky, the commander of the Operational Strategic Group of Tabriya troops. According to him, 59 units of the enemy's military equipment were destroyed or damaged. In the area of city Vuglidar, the administrative border of Donetsk and the Zaporizhia region, Ukrainian units and troops advanced towards the enemy up to 1 kilometer as part of measures to improve the tactical positions during the defensive operation. This was reported in the United Press Center of the Defense Forces of the Tavri region. Here, the Ukrainians continue not only to hold the lines, but are also noted for the successful offensive actions. Defensive forces of Ukraine are gradually vacating the territories in the eastern and southern directions, said the Deputy Minister of Defense, Hanna Malyar. According to her, over the past week and a half, the Ukrainian military has advanced more than 3 kilometers in the eastern direction. In the south, too, there is a gradual but sure progress. Where will the armed forces deliver the main blow, you would ask? Active actions of the armed forces of Ukraine are currently carried out at the tactical level, not at the operational level, according to the military expert, former spokesman of the General Staff of Ukraine Armed Forces. This actually makes the Russian General Staff very nervous because they still don't know where exactly the Ukrainian army will exert its maximum effort. This is why the Russians move their reserve here and there, back and forth. According to the spokesperson, active hostilities are taking place in the south of the Zaporizhia region. There is some movements in the south of the Donetsk region. A difficult situation arose for the Russian occupiers in the Bakhmut area as well. Fighting is also taking place in the Serebryansk foresty area in the Luhansk region. So it's obvious that the enemy, having already used a certain part of the reserves, even of the strategic level, still doesn't see where exactly the strategic reserve of Ukrainian defense forces are concentrated. And this is a good sign. Let our large-scale counteroffensive be unexpected for the enemy. The Ukraine armed forces have not yet launched a counteroffensive as such, said Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the president of Ukraine. And Russia says, we have already won. We have already repelled the counteroffensive, he added. But Podolyak also announced the goal of the armed forces as of today. The first thing is to destroy as many mobilized as possible in order to add psychological pressure on the Russian army. The second goal is to destroy as many Russian equipment as possible, to destroy it completely so they cannot use it at all. This is exactly what our armed forces are doing today. They destroy, and destroy again. At the same time, they're gradually advancing within the framework of the testing regime. That is, they're looking at where the weakest spots will be, Podolyak added. He also said the third component is not a specific direction. Today, Ukraine demonstrates what a modern war is. It attacks in many directions at once. The enemy will be defeated, and we as a nation will do everything to get the freedom for our country. Thank you for listening my podcast. If you like it, please share it with your friends.